Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello?
Hello, could I please speak with John?
So this is Sjón.
I'm so happy to have you on the phone. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. Thank you so much for taking my call. Tell me, where do I find you, and how are you, and how have you been spending this quarantine time?
It's great to hear from you, Paul.
It's so good to hear.
Yeah, I'm actually in a small town called Eyrarbakki. It is a former fishing village here on the south coast of Iceland.
What is the name of the village? Can you say it again?
It's called Eyrarbakki.
I had to have you say it.
Fantastic. Yes, it's Eyrarbakki. Yeah, and it's a beautiful small village, and my wife and I we've had a house here for 20 years now. It's the 20th summer that we are here, and it's just by the sea. What can I say? If I go down to the shore, just here, like 2 minutes from the house, and I look south, there is nothing between my gaze and the South Pole. That's what they say.
Goodness me, I thought of you transported me there. I feel.
Yes, yeah. So I've just started coming back here because during the lockdown, we stayed in Reykjavik. We were advised not to leave Reykjavik, not even for this small town here, because they said that if we would bring the virus here, it would be quite disastrous for the smaller places. So we stayed in Reykjavik for 3 months almost before coming here.
I have no notion, John, so you have to help me understand how hardly hit has Iceland been?
Our small size tends to work with us when it comes to disasters. And the first cases were diagnosed here, I think, at the very end of February. Luckily, our politicians decided to step aside and give the stage to the medical experts and the people running the emergency services. So I think from the beginning, we felt in safe hands, so to speak. Quite a number of people, of course, caught the virus. There were 10 deaths, which is not much on the global scale, but it is a loss in a small country like ours. But we went through the whole thing, the lockdown and the distancing and all the mechanisms, that people have had to go through in other countries. The people who ran the operations here and were in charge of the measures taken, they came up quite fast with a very efficient system of testing and tracking and quarantining.
It was very.
It became almost like a national sport here to flatten the curve. Every day at 2:00, 2 doctors and 1 police officer. They gave press meetings on the television, and it was all about doing this together, coming together as people to flatten the curve. And we just sat there excited about seeing the curve go down, and maybe because there is trust here in there is trust in people like the health authorities and also in the people in charge of the emergency measures. So we came together.
This is not the situation here, both in terms of trust and who we trust and who we entrust with our trust. How many people live in Iceland?
Like I said, everything is on a microscopic scale here. There is 340,000, something like that, inhabitants spread around the country. But most of the people live in Reykjavik and in the surrounding area. Reykjavik is the capital. So that is also the area that was hardest hit by the virus. But, we also discovered, let's say, the underlying illnesses of our society, because what came to light, let's say, in the second and third week of the pandemic here, was that there was a part of society that was not addressed by the authorities, and that is the ever-growing number of people who live here who do not have Icelandic as their first language. There's a big population of Polish people here. There are Filipino people, Lithuanians, people from Latin America, and we realized that they have not been part of the public discourse here for years, and now there was the danger that let's say life-saving information would not reach them. Luckily, that was put right, and I hope it will lead to this group of people being more accepted and involved and embraced by our society in the future. And
quickly said, how was that set right, as you put it?
How was it set right? Simply by the state media. Starting to translate the press meetings, starting to translate the latest news on the progress of the pandemic. The main newspapers started translating into Polish and English, So all of a sudden, it was recognized that they are here and that they need to be addressed and they need to be seen as full citizens of this small country. I think one of the lessons or one of the things that we see whenever there is a pandemic is that the viruses thrive on inequality. Inequality is always at the service of the viruses. So this was an example of that, I think.
And you have a sense of this for having studied the Spanish flu for, I think, 15 years or so in Iceland.
Yes.
In Iceland. And do you feel, Sjón, it might be a bit of an odd question, but why not? Do you feel that those 15 years of studying the effects of the Spanish flu on Iceland in a way prepared you to better understand this one?
Yes. It's always the same pattern pattern that you see when the pandemics hit. It is a series. There are always the same series of mistakes, and then usually when it is too late, people realize that this is really happening. The virus that is hitting us this time is really as bad as the old virus, and that we are really as badly prepared for it. So there's always the same pattern, and it's scary how vulnerable even today in our, technically advanced societies, that we are still so vulnerable to the effects of the pandemics. And I could sit there, of course, in the first, in the first weeks when it started spreading in China and then outside China, and then it was all of a sudden in Europe, and it was in Italy, it was in Tyrol, and all of a sudden it was here. I could almost just sit there with my checklist from my research, and seeing, okay, now we're here, now we're here. But there's very little help in that. But maybe I was a little bit better prepared. I knew what was awaiting us.
You knew what was coming.
And it was Yeah, it was strange. I was giving a reading from this book, Moonstone, The Boy Who Never Was, which is the novel that takes place in the Spanish influenza here in Iceland in 1918. I was giving a reading in a small town here in Iceland from the book at the very end of February. Everybody, the reading was in a small church, in a small village church, and everybody, the people started looking at each other and realizing, okay, he's talking about something that happened all those years ago, but we are probably in the midst of it right now.
It's incredible when literature can perform that, and something you've been interested in, which I'd love to talk to you about, and it's something that's been on your mind, is that there's been a reported increase in what you call vivid dreaming. And I was, when you told me that, John, I was so taken by it. And I remembered that Charlotte Berat wrote a book, which was then reviewed in the New Yorker, entitled How Dreams Change Under Authoritarianism. When the Nazis came to power, the writer Charlotte Berat began collecting dreams. What did she learn? And one paragraph quotes Svetlana Alexievich. It says, like Svetlana Alexievich's oral history of post-war Soviet citizens, Berat's work uncovers the effects of authoritarianism regimes on the collective unconscious. So tell me something about your interest in this reported increase, and also, have you been paying attention to your dreams?
Yes, I just started hearing from friends and family, people who I was corresponding with, of course, like online and through emails and telephone calls, that people were experiencing very strong dreams. It might be, of course, simply because when you're in a lockdown, you sleep more, and it's more likely that you wake up at the right moment for remembering your dreams, But I think it was also because people were simply under a great pressure, and they were tackling with elements that somehow couldn't be stated, in waking life. They were trying to put together the puzzle, in the depths of their minds, during the day, and maybe they might see some of it come together or not come together during the night. And I think this is very interesting because I felt that for the last maybe, let's say, 15, 20 years, it was like dreams had gone out of fashion. You remember in the 60s and into the 70s, there were all these pocketbooks on dreams, and people were really interested in looking inwards, and both psychiatrists, and people of medical science, but also the general public was interested in dreams on some level. And then it seemed to fade away, and maybe it was the digital age that somehow took over, that we are dreaming aloud in a way when we are browsing from one piece of information to another on the internet. I don't know. I don't have a clue why it faded out, but it faded out definitely. So it seems that dreams are coming back, and I think whenever dreams come back, it means that there are big changes ahead.
Oh, say a little bit more about that. That is really interesting.
Well, it means that that we are maybe becoming aware again of the inner processes. That the inner processes that give form to like I said earlier, the unspoken And I started as a teenage surrealist, so I really am a big believer in man dreaming the future, into being. And we would have to get a new collection of dreams from around the globe to maybe get a hint of where or what that future will be. Of course, we will never. Those of us who will be, who have left the States when that future arrives, we will not know. But maybe we will get a glimpse of the future, that future in our dreams today. So I really think that,
No, that makes me think a little bit about this project that is so interesting, and for some reason, not in a prepared way, Sjón, but I had the occasion on the quarantine tapes to speak with Margaret Atwood. I had occasion to speak with Elif Shafak, and now I'm speaking with you, Sjón. And you are, the three of you, this trinity is connected by a most utopian project, namely the Library of the Future. And I'd love you.
Yes.
I'd love you to say something about that, because it also pertains in a way to dreams, and in a way to a hope for the future, and in a way to a sense that we don't know. We're entrusting our words to something that we don't know if it will or won't be understandable. And I often think about that wonderful line of Borges where he says, "I don't want to die in a language I can't understand." And maybe you can say something about this Library of the Future and how it might resonate, particularly, perhaps even more so, in the current atmosphere.
Yes, you're definitely right. It is a very hopeful project, and it believes that a dialogue can take place over centuries, even, and that we should be aware that as authors, that what we are writing today, and that the books or poems or plays or whatever we write, it's all a contribution to a conversation. We will never hear the reply to the things that we put out and we put into the future, but at least we showed the people of the future the respect of addressing them and allowing them to share in our world and our dreams. Literature is a form of a dream. Again, speaking from the surrealist point of view, I think the most realist novel is still has the shape of a dream, because it's an imagined thing. And the Future Library is a place where we can imagine the future together, and where the people of the future can, of course, imagine the world that they come from.
And very briefly, so that our listeners understand, the Future Library was started maybe 5 years ago, and it invites writers to write a book that will be in the ground, put in the soil for 100 years, and rediscovered, as it were, but really discovered 100 years from now, for a reader who you won't know, which is in effect not unlike writing books, generally speaking. What remains, again, to quote Borges, he has this wonderful line where he says, "When writers die, they become books, which is after all not too bad, an incarnation." And in a way, the Future Library takes that one step further and says, now you are alive, but you're sending a bottle, as it were, but putting it in the soil for a future generation that may or may not understand what you've written. But it will be a chronicle of that moment.
Absolutely. And in my case, writing in Icelandic, I can't even be sure that there will be people speaking or reading that language in 100 years.
That's right.
A language spoken by such a small population, is always in the danger of getting lost. So I'm also writing against that. Let's say against that possibility.
It was so interesting speaking with Edgar Keret, an Israeli writer, recently. He won a big prize, and they asked him what he wanted to do with that prize, and he said, I would like my books to be translated into Yiddish. And why Yiddish? Well, because of his forebearers, all the people who have mattered to him, many of the writers who have mattered to him. But what was so interesting with Sjón is that his parents spoke Yiddish at home, when they didn't want the young Edgar to understand what they were saying because it was a private language. So he had his books translated into a language that he himself doesn't understand.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it? I found it extraordinary. Yes. Now, you've said something that only by putting literature into an ecological template can we understand what role writers might have in saving the earth and humankind. What did you mean by that?
Well, I've been trying to answer the question: what can literature contribute to the battle against the climate emergency? Or what can we? What can we contribute simply? And while I was thinking about it, I realized that instead of dictating to writers that they should write about this or that subject matter, that they should write, let's say, stories of hope, or they should be looking for possibilities of better or more responsible living in their poems, or what, that we should start looking at literature as a part of the ecological system, and I realized that if we take the ecological model and start thinking about literature in the terms that brings, we realize that literature is something that authors should preserve, as it is a product of this organism, the Homo sapiens organism, and it has been for millennia a tool of survival for us, but never by the obvious, by taking obvious route.
Right.
So I thought, that we should preserve. That it was our responsibility to preserve literature in all its forms, and by that I mean we should all be responsible for languages, for smaller languages. We should be responsible for their survival. We should be responsible for people's access to a platform where they can tell their stories in whatever form they feel is right for their stories. So I just started seeing literature as part of the ecological system that we are hoping to return, let's say, to a state that is more hospitable to our species. But writers usually when you tell writers that you tell writers something like you should all join the battle against this or that. There is always like a very large group of writers who resist
Right.
those calls, and rightly so, because we never know what kind of literature will help us, over the next hill. It's not slogans, I think.
It leads me to want to ask you what kind of literature matters to you at this moment. But before I do that, a very quick question: Are you still working with Björk?
I am indirectly working with her at the moment. It's a bit of a secret what it will be. So it's not been announced.
Keep it a secret.
Yeah, we will keep it a secret. But we are always we are always in touch and on good terms. And I met her just last week, really.
Well, let's
together we will try to save the world, with the rest of the population of the globe.
Please do. I can't wait for that. You once spoke with an Icelandic philosopher who, when you asked him what is culture, he said culture is doing things well, doing things with care. I love that definition.
Yes.
I love that definition. I love that definition because culture then means, taking care of things with one's hands, being like a craftsman, being manipulating with careful tactility. I'd love you to expand on that for a moment.
What can I say? I think actually all of us have a very deep felt respect for people who can do things well. Craftsmen, singers, stand-up comedians.
Right.
Painters, I think there is a drive. There's a drive in us where we respect the good craft, and as you know, the what can we say? The ancient. Troubled relationship between tyrants and poets, for example,
yes,
comes from the tyrant recognizing the art of the poet, that the poet has a unique access to language and can create from language, language which is so much lighter than gold, amazing things.
Yeah, it outlives the tyrant. Sjón, in closing, will you leave us with a poem or something that you like or love? And I'd love you, because I know you have so much poetry in your head by heart. I'd love you to recite it in Icelandic and then maybe leave us with the English translation.
I'll recite for you a small poem that is actually on the art of poetry. I think it is a hopeful poem. It's called Ars Poetica. Það vill henda í ljóðum að þegar þokunni léttir takjum með sér fjallið. Ars Poetica. It may happen in poems that when the fog lifts, it takes the mountain with it.
Sjón, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I can't wait when we meet again. Thank you so much for taking this call.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's so great to hear your voice again, and let's hope it won't be long until we meet in the flesh.
Let's hope. Thank you for everything. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.